Welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the learning and development industry. As always, we'll be bringing some laughter and a bit of fun along the way, but more importantly, you'll get some incredible insights, key lessons, and unique perspectives on everything related and possibly unrelated to training and development. Let's get this show on the road. Hello everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. And today I am joined by Andrew Jacobs, who has a wealth of experience in learning, training, talent, and people development across multiple industries. His expertise extends to a deep understanding of online and digital solutions for education and engagement and how to put those principles into practice. He is a fellow of the Learning Performance Institute and in 2020 received the Time Alliance Award for his work on informal learning. Andrew is known for his innovative thinking and isn't afraid of questioning the status quo. He is also the producer of the Women Talking About Learning podcast and puts out some great thought pieces daily on his blog, Lost and Desperate. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. Delighted to be here.
So, I know you're a man of many opinions, and I'm going to start by asking for the big kind of broad sweeping opinion is what is your take on the state of the learning and development industry? I mean, for you, what's working, what's not working?
I've worked in learning development about 30 years. About 15 years ago, I realised that we were too many smoke and mirrors, and so some of the things that we do are the thing I call Mexican food, where we deliver the same stuff but just fold it differently and market it as something new, where we focus on acquisition and pumping people full of information when people want application and awareness. We don't understand data effectively, so we don't evaluate effectively. So we try to prove our value through our busyness with a Y as opposed to business with an I. There's three to start off with.
So, I mean, what do you think is actually going right in the industry before we kind of delve into those, before we kind of unpack the how to fix those big issues?
We are really good at understanding what people want, and we market to what we think people will want to use. We are a really caring profession, and I think the people who work really care, and they care both about the profession and the activity that we do, but also the people they work with, and they want to do the right thing. We have an industry that understands it needs to be much more strategic now than it ever has been in the past. There's a phrase I use, moving from a shopkeeper to an engineer, and we've become much more engineering in terms of our approach, but not fully yet. So we are moving. The difficulty is there's a lot of people who used to work in training and then came into work one day and found they were in learning. And did anything change? It was just a rebranding. And it's fundamentally a different move. So we're great at training. We're great at and fabulous at training, but that's only one arm or one span of the learning umbrella.
So do you want to unpack what you mean by the difference between training and learning?
So to me, learning is a coverall term. So everything we do is learning, and underneath learning you will have training, which will then go into direct instruction, for example. You will have online design, you will have face-to-face, you will have coaching, you will have a range of different things that you can put in place which fall under the learning umbrella. Curation will sit into that space, for example. Understanding of how people put things together fits underneath the learning umbrella. So the understanding andragogy and heutagogy and how people learn is a skill that sits within there. And this is the difficulty. I think that we were really good at training, and that's what we did. So we just put a new coat on and said we're now learning, but we are doing things fundamentally wider than just the training piece. So learning in itself is so much wider, and things like coaching should sit underneath the learning umbrella. There's no reason they should be anywhere else. They are part of learning. The difficulty comes, though, because we've conditioned businesses that we work with to accept training when what they probably need is learning, which is a wider range of activity.
Now, I mean, so I guess the big question, if I was putting myself into a learning and development manager's shoes, is this seems like an unbelievably large thing to bite off. Like moving from offering training to learning, and everything you've described almost sounds like there's too much for one individual's capabilities to be efficient and successful doing all of that stuff at once. So is it a case of picking your battles? Is it realistic to think that you can do all of those things and do them really well? What are your takes on that?
So there's the things that I do is I help people understand how to do that stuff differently. There's several key elements. The first one is make sure that you've got stakeholders on board with it. So you need to find somebody who has your back. They have either power from a hierarchical power, but they also have to have influence. They have to have some kind of social influence in the organisation. And you want them to support you trying to do something differently. And it needs to only be one thing, but you do that one thing differently. What you do though is you then understand the analysis and the background and all of the other activity and the data that sits in that space as well, so you can prove its effectiveness. It's really important that that pilot doesn't fail. Pilots don't fail. Pilots only have degrees of success. So you need to make that pilot as successful as possible. And what you do is you spend time working with those sponsors to come up with something new. You only need to change one thing, but you change one thing today, change one thing tomorrow, change one thing the day after tomorrow, and eventually over a period of time you will shift and move the culture within the organisation. And it does, it's enormous. Again, you don't boil the ocean, kind of thing. You do things a small step at a time. What's really important is it's not for me to say you must do this first or do that first. Every context that everybody is working in is entirely different. The key behind it, though, is to understand, well, what are the principles that this organisation wants to work to? I assume that what they want is, are people to be better? Are people to succeed? And that should be the driving principle that sits behind what you do. And what you then do is take that principle, we want our people to be better, and then work with someone who's signed up to understanding that there's a change needed and to move these things forward.
So, I mean, if we kind of explore that a little bit, I think you could probably say the same about every single company in the world. I mean, any company that says we don't want to succeed and we don't want our people to be better, you would probably think you're not going to be around for very long. So I think it's a given that that's what every company ultimately wants. I think the challenge is in the nuances of how you get there, because not every single organization has the same kind of culture, the same context, the same immediate challenges, the same macroeconomic factors, microeconomic factors. Mm-hmm. So when you're navigating that, you've talked about kind of finding this ally, this decision maker, this person has influence and power. You're talking about making these kind of micro, kind of these small incremental changes and not boiling the ocean. Given that every single organization is going to have different nuances, what is your advice to people in terms of understanding the organization you're in from that perspective and navigating that complexity?
Okay. Pick up on one point first of all. Everybody wants their people to be better. I don't know if necessarily that's always the case as to why learning is commissioned or why training is commissioned. I know a lot of organisations, and I've experienced it in the past, where organisations want a program to happen for just the benefit of saying they did a program. Or they want to put a particular manager, they want to exit someone from the organisation, but before they can do that, they have to put everybody through a program so that they can then go back and go, well, you went through this program, this manager, same as everybody else, but you didn't succeed at it, or you're still not succeeding. So learning and training is used sometimes as a stick to beat people within the organisation rather than making things better. I do acknowledge, though, that, yeah, absolutely, there is a what does better look like. So you can break it down to the old balanced scorecard approach. So find out from the managers across 4 domains. First of all, is it about people being better? So is it about the individual people who work in the organisation? Is it about engagement? I hate the word, but people feeling they belong more within the organisation. Is it a cultural change in the organisation that you want to bring through? Is it that people feel happy in work, that there's less sickness, etc., that kind of thing? Second area you can look at is to do with what I call control. So is it budgetary activity you want? Is it the mandated health and safety legislative kind of stuff that you want people to be better at? Difficult one to prove, but there's a sense of fastidiousness and people doing the right thing within that control box. Third box you might want to look at is to do with customers. So is it about our relationships we want to improve with external customers, with new external customers, or with existing external customers? Or is it we want to improve relationships internally, maybe with some of our suppliers, existing suppliers or new suppliers? Or is it internally within our organisation, within our people? Again, new people coming in or existing people. And the fourth domain you would then look at is obviously his business result. So any manager worth their salt will be looking at those 3 domains and then the fourth one as well to say, okay, this is the kind of things I want. So if I'm an L&D person, I've been tasked to make people better. What I'd be saying is it the people you want better? Is it the control you want better? Is it the customer you want better? Is it the finance you want better? Is it all of them? And what does that look like in practice? So I know in 3, 6, 9, 12 months' time, when I go back and look at it, I can see that people are now behaving differently. And that just changes, it reassesses and reframes the conversation that learning then has with the business, because it is now engineering rather than just going, you want a course? Here's a course. And nothing then changes.
So I've had previous conversations, kind of building on from that, previous conversations with people about this kind of emerging role of the learning and development expert practitioner. And you described, I think, the previous world of the trainer, where you were a cost center in the organization. People would come to you and you would just dish up what they asked for. And now, as we're describing, the learning practitioner is someone who is more wide into the organization, is keeping their finger on the pulse of what's going, is measuring, looking for little symptoms and signs of things and measuring performance. I think that the challenge, though, as I've seen, is what are those requisite skills that you look for in people who can be effective and influential in that kind of organization? Because I kind of almost end up describing this role as you learning managers or learning professionals are becoming mini CEOs in the organization, where you've got to understand the strategy, you've got to understand the people, you've got to understand the gap, you've got to be a marketing expert, you've got to be a sales expert, you've got to be an operations expert, you've got to be a data and analytics expert. How are you seeing all of this taking shape?
So the one person on their own is going to find that difficult, but if you're in an organisation where you're one on your own, arguably the organisation will be a bit smaller, so it wouldn't be so difficult to have that information. There's a couple of things you can do. Firstly, you should be co-opting those people in to be able to support it. So if you want to understand, has this made a strategic change in the organisation? Let's have a look. Is there a strategic change happening? Go back to your senior C-suite and see, are we improving the finance and budgetary controls in the organisation? Go back to your finance directors and get them to pursue the results for you. You don't have to do that extra bit of work. So it's partly to do with relationships. I spend a lot of time talking to people about the 3 Ps in terms of skills, and they are people skills, personal skills, and process skills. So within the learning development space, the people skills are how you interact with other people, and so those skills are very different now. So there's a skill of brokering now, which I think learning development functions need. And it's a commercial skill, understanding, well, what is the support that you really want here, and being able to get to the nub of what the problem is. There's an analysis skill there that sits in with that, being able to sell and market in a very different way rather than just nodding and agreeing. The second skill, like I say, is to do with personal skills, which the analysis piece comes into. It's a focus on what the success looks like, and so it's focus on a more strategic thinking. I tell people to think strategically but act tactically, and I think we don't do that. I think we think operationally and act transactionally, and that's the difference. So it's a higher level of thinking. And there's also a thing that I call heavy thinking as well, which is a creative thinking plus critical thinking. So you need to be able to do both if you're working in a learning development space now. And so critical thought, analysing what will and won't work, but also being creative around it, particularly current economic environments, political environments, and so on. And the last one is the process skills. So what are the new process skills that you've got? Doesn't matter if you're great standing up in front of people, being able to deliver, because you know what? There's a whole new skill now where you have to be able to do it like this, for example, online with people. That's a whole new skill. That's an entirely different skill set that you need to be able to do. And what are those other new skills that are coming in? So do you have an understanding of technology? Do you have an understanding of how AI is being used and influencing in your business? Do you have an understanding of the how to create pivot tables in Excel and produce Power BI data reports for people? Those are the process skills. So it's across those three: the personal skills, the people skills, and the process skills. And you need to do a bit of analysis yourself as an individual in the L&D space and go, where do I need to work on first?
The one I found quite fascinating there was when you were talking about the people skills, and you were talking about the changing in style of thinking from kind of operational, transactional to strategic, and I'm trying to remember the word you used. Tactical, yeah. Can you just kind of give us an indication of what one versus the other looks like?
So, good example, somebody comes to you and says, we want to improve sickness absence in the organisation. Okay, we have to improve the way we manage sickness absence. I appreciate if you've got listeners in the US, you might think, well, this is a bit peculiar, but it's a very European, UK-centric. What we tend to do is we go, all right, so let's have a look and see what we've done in the past. We've done an e-learning course, so now let's make it face-to-face instead. That's operational thinking. That's thinking, okay, so let's produce some face-to-face stuff and then we deliver it, and we get transactional data back which shows that these people did it on these dates and this is what the success rate was when they did the assessment. That's very operational and transactional. If the intent is we want to improve sickness absence, what we should be doing is, like I said, thinking strategically. So ask the question, what is the level at now and what do you want the level to be at? Is it short-term sickness? Is it long-term absence? If it's multiple instances of short-term, is it in the same place? Is it in a range of places? Is it through one manager or a range of managers? What's the background of those managers? What's the cohort? If it's long-term, does it relate to incidents in the last few years with COVID and so on? Is it, again, one area of work? Are there health and safety implications? It's strategic thinking around it. And then what we do is we act tactically. What we now do is we go, where's the data? What's the data telling us around these numbers? So you want to bring it down from 3.3 days absence per person to 2.9. Well, what would that look like in practice? Is that number of incidents and so on? And you work with the organisation, understanding what that will look like in practice. And this is where brokerage comes in. It could be that managers just don't know how to complete the documentation, or managers are scared of doing return to work interviews, or managers are struggling how to use the technology which they've got. And this is where you then broker. So what's the support that might be needed? And then we produce support which is going to be relevant. I talk to people about capability a lot, being capacity plus ability. And learning development, we focus on ability. We will train you up in how to be the best person managing sickness absence. What we should be doing is talking about the capacity. So the space to be able to perform. There's no point training everybody on managing sickness absence if a manager doesn't have any team who ever go off sick, or they go off for one day and he manages it perfectly well. Why are we training that manager? So it's about, that's what I mean by thinking strategically and acting tactically. Understand what the problem is within the organisation and then act in an appropriate way.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great insight, and I think I would imagine that, when you get stuck into the kind of the daily grind, that often ends up, kind of becoming a practical reality of being in the job. It's difficult to step out of that, kind of when you're in it, and because what you described, I think, has an element of needing to have perspective, being able to step outside of something and looking at it from a more strategic and kind of more analytical thing, and interrogating it, kicking the tires, and questioning your thinking. In terms of that, are you? I mean, have you experienced times in your career where you've kind of had to consciously remind yourself, I'm actually too much in the kind of heart of it, and I need to step back and get that perspective?
All the time. I love getting up in front of people and going, yeah, let's do this and do that, and the sage on the stage, and podcasts. You can tell I do podcast stuff and so on, with the microphone. All of that kind of stuff. I love being the centre of attention. The best learning people aren't the centre of attention. The best learning people are, as a phrase I use, turning fibres into fabric. They are understanding how to bring all of those things together and put them together for somebody else to be able to produce. The best learning functions just get on and get stuff done without having to make a big song and dance about it. There's a phrase, learning theatre, where we have lots of theatre that happens, where lots of people are highlighting all the great things they do, but nothing changes because it's all performative. And the best stuff isn't performative. The best stuff just gets stuff done and changes things without making, without having to produce, enormous things. Those enormous programs, absolutely, they are necessary and relevant and important, and everybody needs them. And we need that stuff, but not all the time.
I think the challenge with, I've been guilty of it a few times in my life, going with the big bang approach, but often taking that approach, the smaller stuff gives you the sense of what's going to be successful before you try something really, really significant. So it's that kind of analytical versus that intuitive approach, and both have their weaknesses, but being able to combine them together into this kind of I would say, like abductive approach is definitely a good way of going about it.
Absolutely. The way I'm suggesting isn't going to be the right thing for everything entirely, but it's you pick your battles, and it's you find where somebody wants to move stuff on, and there will always be an opportunity to try something new. Yeah,
and that's I've interestingly, I was introduced to the pick your battles way too late in my career, after probably fighting too many unnecessary battles, and ever since, it's so fascinating, because you get into this headspace where you see problems all around you and you've got to fix them all, and it took me a while to figure that sometimes you do more harm than good trying to do that, and it's been a quite a valuable and hard lesson to learn sometimes, that you've really got to be very careful and conscious about what you focus on, and be willing to kind of leave something in an imperfect state.
There's what's the phrase? An exchange rate between trust and respect, and you have to respect some people's ways of wanting things done before they will trust you. And when they trust you enough, then you can do something different. But you have to respect that the way we've done stuff in the past is the way that they like it being done, and you might have to do it that way for some time before they trust you to the point where you can do something a little bit differently. And that exchange rate between trust and respect is really interesting, because it varies, it fluctuates between people, and it's so easy to lose as well. You do something before you've got that trust from people, they will think that you don't respect them, and you then start from the beginning again.
Yeah, that's great insight. So we've talked a lot about existing learning, kind of this transition of learning, but if we can now spend a bit of time maybe talking about where learning is going, and specifically from your point, what are some of the big trends that you are starting to see impacting the learning ecosystem?
They're really interesting as to how we've moved. So I talk about learning used to live in a just-in-case world, where learning was done just in case something happened, and years and years and years of doing it. Anybody who's been in the workplace for 20 or 30 years will remember doing fire safety, risk assessment, health and safety, managing lifting stuff, for example, and that focus, and we took that approach into other stuff within the workplace. So we did it with our management stuff, we did it with our soft skills, horrible word, etc. And we did this just in case approach to it. Then technology moved things on, and we moved to a just-in-time approach. And we understood how to use computers better. We understood how to do computer-based training, and we started producing, just-in-time learning, where people could do it at a time that suited us, so they weren't taken away for long periods of time. What's happened, particularly since the advent of these things, the mobile phone, is we've now got just for me learning. So I can pick and choose the stuff I want to do. So it's self-directed. You can put a menu of things up in front of me, and then I can choose from that menu. And people feel that they have an element of control within that. What's really interesting is post-pandemic, we've moved beyond that from just for me learning to what I call just enough learning. The technology has moved things on, and we've got to a point where people are self-determining their learning. So not self-directing, but self-determining. Self-direction is choosing from a list. Self-determining is picking for themselves from even outside the list that you provided. And we're in a world now where people used to do it before, but now quite happily will sit there and Google and YouTube how to do a pivot table in Excel. And they will do that for themselves. They will just pick that and go and do it. They don't have to go to a course. They will do that for themselves. They don't even need to remember it necessarily. All they need to remember is where do I need to go to get that instruction again for 4 months' time when I'm going to need to ask it again. And that, I think, is interesting. So that idea of the depth of knowledge that we have to have behind a topic has changed. The access to material and content has fundamentally changed. The choice of what I do and don't do is much more down to me as an individual. And I've got freedom at my desk here to go wherever I want. Throw on top of that AI, the generative AI activity which has come out in the last 15 months or so, and the world has moved on. We go back to where we were in 2019, look to where we are now, 2024, 5 years later. The world is an entirely different place for a learning development professional. And if you've not moved with that, you're very far behind the curve, and you have to understand what that's going to look like in the future.
So there's a lot of things to unpack in what you've just said. I think, So like moving from the kind of just in time to almost kind of, as you say, self-determining or almost just in need, where I've got a problem in front of me, I need to overcome that problem, and I need learning at that exact point in time based on what I need to overcome. Is different. I mean, it's a inevitable, I think, evolution of learning. I think, though, it comes with certain challenges to organizations, especially as they start to grow. And I'm wondering, if you've seen any symptoms of this in kind of medium to larger organizations, where, when you're a small organization, you're kind of playing in the space of mystery. You're kind of trying to figure out things. You're seeing kind of slight patterns emerging, and those patterns become heuristics, and those heuristics become processes inside your organization. And there comes a point, I think, in that process where you're looking for stability, repeatability, conformance, so that you're not reinventing the wheel, that the organization has got a foundation and is growing from that foundation. But when people, they're saying organizations of the future, and this kind of future work is going to be around adaptability, unlearn, relearn, all of these types of patterns. But one thing I've never really kind of been able to solve, and I know it's probably an unfair or tough question, but worth a debate, is organizations that need that structure, need that stability, need that kind of that retained organizational memory or wisdom, versus people who are going off and changing the rules, breaking the rules, how those two at some stage are going to start to kind of create this tension within the organization.
There's a great phrase by Seth Godin, the marketeer. Bureaucracy is the scaffolding of success. So if we just unpack that for a second. So we put together processes and bureaucracies around the things that we have done, which we know that worked. And that small organisation you were talking about, that small organisation which hasn't yet grown to that large size, won't have those bureaucracies in place. The moment they're successful and they do well, that becomes I hate the word, best practice. That becomes the way things are done. and we will put bureaucracies in to create that space. And that scaffolding is good because it then means that we have a repeatability, and we can scale and we can replicate this thing again and again and again. However, what it then does is prevents us from diversifying, number one. And number two, it forces the rest of the organisation, as the organisation grows, to fit within that space. So the smart organisation development, the smart people development, will be looking at the bureaucracy that is preventing these things happening and saying, well, if we take that away, how will that work? And as long as the organisation doesn't fall over, that's where we can then move forward. The difficulty is your C-suite and your senior leaders are likely to have come in at a point when the scaffolding was being erected, or we even designed the scaffolding themselves. So to take those things away, they're going to feel really uncomfortable. This is why having people who are on your side and happy to start moving things around is really, really important. I had another thought and it's completely gone now.
Oh, I mean, this is a fascinating topic, though. So, I mean, let's kind of delve a little bit deeper in here. So, I mean, this is probably one of the most frightening things that any person working in an organization could undertake, because, you know, you talked about best practices. I call it the organizational DNA. I mean, it's the memory. It's the thing that kind of gave birth. It's the thing that made the success, and it's the thing that defines the organization. And without it, the organization wouldn't be what it is today. And, you know, unlike the human genome, where you know, our DNA is set, and it's really how we activate certain kind of components of the DNA, which just changes the behavior. What we're talking about here is potentially, you know, kind of changing elements of the DNA inside the organization. And that's quite a scary thought for the people, as you've talked about, in the organization, but more so for the intrepid person who is going to try and take that journey on.
Yeah. So we work with organisations, and we work with we call it a dartboard, and the dartboard, if you imagine, has got it's made up of 5 circles. So largest circle around the outside, and then they get progressively smaller. And the small circle in the base is strategy. So if you want to change and shift the shape of that organisation, you want to look at the scaffolding that's around it, and you want to try and help the organisation grow, you need to have absolute clarity on the strategy, the aims, the objectives of the organisation. What is the target that we are aiming for? And that has to be clearly broadcast, understood, and written into everybody's way of working. So everybody understands we do what we do, and this is why we do it. From top through to bottom, from one side through to the other. It has to be complete. So do we have absolute clarity on what the aims, the objectives are? The second circle that then sits outside of that is looking at structure and relationships. So is the structure of the organisation built to be able to support those aims, those objectives? Are the relationships, so the structure is to do with the roles, the relationships to do with the people. Do we have the right structure and the right roles in place? Then do we have the right relationships and the right people in place? And if we have a gap, or those two aren't working together, we will never meet the aims. So the conversations with your senior leadership, how do we get the right people, and what does the structure need to look like? This is where the blurring between learning and OD happens, and this is why it's way bigger than just being training. We then look at our systems, processes, and ways of working. So we have the clear understanding of what we want to do, we have the structure in place, and we've got the right people. Are our ways of working in the right place as well? This is where digitisation is coming in from a learning development perspective, but also just generally. Yeah, we're seeing it in the UK particularly. You know, in retail, are our systems and ways of working able to support retail in the way that we did it in the past? Probably not, because we don't need shops in the way we did, because we don't get footfall because people purchase online. So are our systems and processes built in the way that we need them to be as well? Again, your L&D function can be asking those really good questions around, are they the right things and how do they work? This is capacity. Then we've got behaviour and skills. Now do we have the right skills? And what do they look like? And that's where we're normally brought into the conversation. But how can you in a learning function operate if you don't know what the other 3 steps are already? This goes back to your point about them being CEO. The fifth circle, the largest circle, the one around the outside, is the culture within the organisation. And that culture, if you don't reflect and understand the culture that you're working within, which is why it's the biggest circle, and you might not like it, your senior leaders will want the aims and objectives to be the biggest circle. They're not. The culture is the biggest circle. If you haven't understood the culture, nothing will change. Because people will do what they want to do, not what you want them to do.
Now, we've described, we started this conversation from the perspective of a learning conversation. Although, I mean, this is a very, very pervasive conversation and really kind of sits across the entire organization. So what is your kind of understanding or view of the role of the person driving learning in the organization? Where do they fit into this puzzle? I mean, what is they take on themselves? What do they kind of look for in kind of other support systems in the organization?
They should be looking at those 5 circles the same way. They should say, okay, so what's our aims, objectives and strategy for learning development within this organisation? Is it clearly understood? Do people perceive us just as a transactional shopkeeper function, or do they perceive us as a strategic partner able to help people understand how to do the work differently? Then we need to look at our roles and our structure. Have we got the right structure to be able to support the organisation in the way that we want to do it, and have we got the right people? So do we have the right relationships with people to understand data? Have we got the right systems and technologies? I do a lot of work with organisations looking at their learning technology stack, and everybody seems to have systems that do 80% of what they want, but they've got 5 or 6 systems that all do 80%, and each of them is missing a slightly different 20%. So you end up with a really complicated stack. So have you got the right systems in place for it? Then we look at the behaviour and skills. Then we look at the 3 Ps. We look at the people, the personal and the process skills. And then we look at the culture. I have lots of conversations with people about learning culture. They go, I want to develop a learning culture in your organisation. You can't. There already is a learning culture in your organisation. The issue is whether you're tapped into it or not.
And what if you look at the learning culture and you don't like what you see? I mean, there has to be the ability to change, right?
But what will you not like? If people are learning and they're doing learning in a way that suits them, you need to understand how to tap into their cadence as to how they're doing things. So if people don't like going on courses, they like just trading stuff with themselves and in groups, well then how do we build on that? How do you make your resources so easy that people are happy to trade them? We did this with a team once, again talking about managing sickness absence. People were having real problems logging into their sickness absence. So what we did is we took half a dozen screenshots, stitched them together and turned them into a GIF. And the next time someone asked us, I'm having real problems logging in, we sent them the GIF. We only sent it to about 3 or 4 people, but we soon found it was everywhere in the organisation. Hundreds of people had it because people were sharing it. So we relied on the culture that was already there and just went, let's drop this in and then step away from it. And we just cut down the number of queries on sickness absence straight away because everybody had the answer. But because people had shared it amongst themselves, it hadn't come from learning, they'd worked it out for themselves. So we just went with the culture. Yeah.
And I mean, if you put yourselves in the shoes of a new learning and development person coming into a new organization, and the learning culture was very much based around, kind of more of a traditional serving up courses, managing people, like course completion rates, course attendance rates, and you needed to make the shift into this kind of deterministic learning. What would your advice to them be?
Go back and ask the people how successful these initiatives have been in the past. What's been the outcomes and what's been the impact? So the outcomes in terms of what effects were created, and the impacts, what happened as a result of this. Now, if they come back to you and go nothing, well, then you're in a really strong place to go, so why are we doing the same thing again? Obviously not in those words, you couch it slightly better terms, but well, how do we approach it and do it a little bit differently this time? And that gives you then permission to start doing things differently. I would guarantee pretty much nobody will have the data to support the outcome and impact measures. Nobody will be able to say, oh, well, yeah, sickness absence is the same as it was before. There won't have been an enormous change that would have happened as a result of it. So don't be afraid to ask for, okay, where's the data to suggest that there's been a change from doing this before, and can we try something else different this time?
Yeah, I think the data is a double-edged sword, because what I've observed is creating an example of what's not working often has the counter to say, if you want to try something new, prove to me, like show me the data that suggests it's going to work. And that's a kind of a secondary kind of gotcha, is how do you go into that type of scenario, almost kind of presenting that data that's going to, I know no new idea or new concept, and let's be honest, I mean, you can't take something from one organization, lift and shift it into another organization, expect it to work the same way. So it will always be a new idea, and no new idea in the history of mankind has ever been proven to be successful in advance. So you've got to kind of encourage people to take a little bit of a trust journey with you.
So I was, again, this goes back to the when I was looking at all these issues about 15 years ago and realised stuff was wrong. I was looking at there's a book by Rogers, Diffusion of Innovation, and he identifies 4 areas as to 4 limits to innovation. And the first one is lateral. So people won't pick up on an innovation and won't try something new if they can't see that anybody else has done it in the past. So if you can give people examples where other people have done these things and these things are working, competitors, people in the same sector, etc., find those examples. And so that's lateral, is the first factor. Second factor is temporal, which is the timing of it. So when is the right time to do it? So, okay, it might not be the right time now. So is it in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, 9 months' time? When is the time when we then start doing it? And you can then get a commitment to the right time, to do these things. Been doing some work with an organisation. It's not been the right time to take some stuff forward. They've got so many other things happening. So it's fine. So we park what we're doing. We come back to them in a year's time and go, now we're at the right time to be doing it. The third reason these things don't happen and innovations are limited is for physical reasons. And the favourite in learning and development I hear all the time is we've got training rooms, so we should be using them. Training room occupancy rates tend to be used as a measure, but those training rooms haven't got to be used for training. They can be used for lots of things. They can be used for practice. They can be used as coaching spaces. They can be used for lots of different things. And it's what are the physical limits? And this is why the 5 circle piece is important. What are the systems and ways of working that we've got that we maybe need to use, adapt, and change in the way we're working? The fourth limit to innovation from Rogers was he talked about hierarchical. So somebody in the business doesn't want it done that way. And that, we think, is the biggest problem. It's probably the easiest problem, because it's reasonable just to go, well, why are you right? And that's where the data piece is important. You're saying that we might do it differently. So if we try it and it proves to work better, why not? And then it's very difficult for them to then push back on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think, as we're kind of coming to the close, we realise that learning is an exciting, new, and very daunting space for people to be entering into. And I guess, my kind of final closing question, just looking at the future again, is just now looking at technology. And I know there's kind of AI, there's spatial computing, there's a whole bunch of interesting and emerging trends. But from a learning point of view, what are you kind of banking on to have the biggest impact on the industry over the next 2 or 3 years?
It's a really good question. That's a really good question, because so everyone's banking on AI at the moment. But people aren't buying AI. What I think is really interesting is that, let's go back. So by AI, I'm not talking big AI, I'm talking about ChatGPT, Bard, Gemini as it's now called, and then these other large language models, and Midjourney, Dolly, the image creators. People have been banking on them. When they were launched, everybody said it's a game changer. Well, we've not understood how to use them properly. And what they have become is really good tools to produce content. However, nobody needed more content. We've got more content than we can shake a stick at. We don't need more content. What we need is to understand how to use content much better. And we're seeing people talking about using AI to do this, do that, and everything else. What I'm not seeing is people actually doing that. What I'm seeing is people talking about AI and talking about how to use AI, but I'm not seeing anybody actually doing it at scale within their work and them getting the results and the data out the back end. So I am slightly concerned that maybe we've gone down this route and AI won't be the answer to everything. I'm not concerned, unsurprised maybe. There's also an issue with AI as well, where we're beginning to see it now already, even just 12 or 15 months after the launch of these things, where the generative AI is not generative. What it is doing is so large language models are not creating. What they're doing is predicting. So they're identifying from lots of data what the most likely response is and putting that together and then creating that response. Now, if we feed more and more data in, what ends up happening is you end up with median data. So you're getting a very average response. And even seeing it now, if you use ChatGPT 3.5 as opposed to 4, you can put a question in, you'll get a very nominal, dull, average response to a question. For people who don't understand how to use the technology, fine, great, yeah, happy to go with that. But then you're going to end up with very average, dull, median content, which people will then work with as well the same way. So that idea that AI is going to break everything in 2 or 3 years, I don't think necessarily is the case. I think that there will be people who are using it and are going to have changes with it, and that will make a big difference. I think the bigger change is likely to come as we unshackle ourselves more from being based at desks and working more remotely. What's really interesting is through the pandemic, knowledge workers, people like you, I can sit at a desk and do our work based on what we do in our heads, and we could do that work. People who are skill workers, so the carers, the shops, the retailers, the teachers, the school assistants, the dinner ladies, the people who work in a physical space, became more problematic for them to work. What we're seeing now is the shift towards understanding how to use mobile technology better, shift to understanding how to put things out to that part of the population, working population, in a better way. And so I think what we will see over the next 2 or 3 years is a shift towards more mobile, more, just in time, just in case, just in time, just for me, just enough stuff on a mobile phone, rather than the big created stuff perhaps from a technology perspective. The other thing we'll see would be data. All of the technologies are all producing a ton of data, and we're beginning to wake up to understand how to use that data more effectively. And I can see that particularly in evaluation. I think evaluation and measurement will become more data-led.
Definitely agree on that, yeah. And maybe just a question on that, because you talked about assessments and data driving decisions. What are your thoughts on assessments in the future? I mean, do you think that there's still a place for assessments? Because I often kind of argue for the opposite, saying that everything is moving so quickly, and actually what we should be aiming towards is varying degrees of mastery and not necessarily assessments. Some things you need to be really, really kind of masterful at, because when you master something, you can be very creative in problem solving around that area of expertise, and some things you just need to be just barely good enough in. But is there a space for assessments? Do you think it's necessary?
Absolutely, but not for the purposes that we want them for. So I think assessment is really good, but not as a memory test. What we should be using assessment for is a way of building peer and peer-to-peer social networks. And so, for example, you've completed a module. Wouldn't it be great if you then complete an assessment which has been set by a previous cohort? So the previous cohort put the questions together as the things they found difficult, which you then have to do the assessment. But they put those questions together from a context space of having them worked and applied and used that in the real world. What you do is you then complete that assessment, and you now have a peer-to-peer relationship with that previous cohort. What you do is, having completed it, a month, we use something the power of 10 days, 10 weeks, 10 months. So 10 days or 10 weeks down the line, you then create an assessment, which then is picked up by the next cohort coming through. That cohort completes the assessment that you have created, and now you've established a peer relationship between you and the previous cohort. So you've now got a group of a minimum of 3 members which now have a relationship around this learning. What you've immediately done is you've picked up on the social learning piece, you're picking up on the assessment and is good enough kind of thing, what works in the real world. As a learner, a learning instructor or somebody externally, I'm now picking up the feedback as to what content works and what didn't work. So I'm able to shape and produce content which suits the cohorts as they move through. So using assessment for that purpose, I think, is a really powerful way to get a better effect from it. Whether it adds a value to just marking and memory testing, I'm not so sure.
Yeah. So I think that's a great way to look at it. Right. So Andrew, I normally finish with 2 questions. I think the one we've probably touched on, which is the kind of practical advice, and we've given lots and lots of practical advice to people. But I think, I would just ask, looking at, maybe existing learning and development managers who've maybe been in the training space, transitioning to the learning space, looking at new learning and development, people coming into the industry. What's the one piece of advice that maybe if you gave to yourself 30 years ago that you think would have benefited your career, other than pick your battles?
Trust no one. Trust no one. Everybody is selling something. Tail wags the dog in the industry. People tell you what you need to know. 3 years ago it was gamification. Everybody was talking about. Now it's AI. In 2 years' time it'll be something else. So, listen to what people are selling and work out what they're selling before you understand whether to trust them. That's the only piece of advice. I'm very much of the opinion that someone new to the sector will be bringing lots of things with them. They will have loads of experiences themselves. I'd much prefer to say to them, what do you think your gaps are? And we work from that perspective, because otherwise people are going to end up with a long list of stuff. So trust no one, including me. Actually ask the people, where do you think your gaps are? What's the help that you think you need? Because you need to understand the approach people are coming from. Someone who's an ex-school teacher coming in is going to have a very different approach to somebody who has been an expert in a business already. They're going to have completely different approaches towards things. So it's not really one approach. It's more one a piece of advice. It's more one question, which is, what help do you think you need?
Insightful, yeah. It's getting me thinking now. And then final question is, we always ask our guests if they can share with us, a book, podcast, something that they've experienced recently that's had a profound effect, kind of made them rethink, have an aha moment.
I was reading the book to do with data in cricket from Ed Smith, and how the England cricket team started using data more effectively. And there are nuggets all the way through it that just tell you how learning development is so far behind the curve in being able to predict performance and understand performance. We are so focused on the acquisition piece that we ignore the performance piece. So go and read Ed Smith's book all about data in cricket, and just get a sense of how to understand data, use data and apply data in a predictive sense.
No, that's fascinating. I'm a big data geek. So this is kind of like the cricket equivalent of Moneyball, right? Which they did for.
it's if you like cricket, you'll love it. It's an awesome read.
Brilliant. And I think that's it's a good way to round up. I think there's a lot of value in data and insights, and I think that my advice to people would be, don't get so wrapped up in trying to make it perfect. Every single organization I've come to is almost crippled by the fact that they can't make use of the data until it's in a pristine condition and sitting in some kind of data warehouse or something before they can use it. And so many times I just suggest like just go and fetch data and put it into a spreadsheet and use it. And you don't have to create a perfect system to be able to start getting value out of your data.
Hilary Mantel, 2017. Facts are not knowledge. It's qualitative and quantitative. She mentioned it herself when she talked about her research, and that's only one part of it. It's that, but also what's happening in the world around you as well.
So on that note, Andrew, I'd like to say a huge thank you. It's been incredibly insightful. I think so many more questions that we could have touched on and gone down. But I think we've got through quite a lot in a very short period of time. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with us.
You're very welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. If you found it interesting or helpful, please subscribe by clicking on the button down below so you don't miss our next one. Also, be sure to check out our Reality Bites blog for more information on how technology is aiding in learning development. Links are all in the description below. Go check it out. Thanks a lot. Bye.